Welcome to Module 2. This is where we talk about trade. But before we talk about trade, notice the class discussion. I'll talk more about discussions here in a second. Warning, warning, warning. This is my last chance to warn students. You can only do so much, right? Too many students take shortcuts, they skip around, and it can really hurt them. And that's my last shot at babysitting, I guess. Please read that and make sure you don't make those mistakes. Okay, to trade. Trade. Why do we trade? There's one reason. We prefer a higher standard of living to a lower standard of living. That's really it. You look at people around the world, and those economies that are more specialized, and they focus in on what they do best, and then they trade with people who do what they do best, we have a higher standard of living. Now you go to developing countries and you see people with an amazing array of skills. They can make anything, they can fix anything, they can really do anything, but they're poor. That's the trade-off of being fully self-sufficient. When I talk about being self-sufficient, you do everything yourself. You don't interact with anybody. So specialization and exchange results in a much higher standard of living than just kind of being to yourself and doing everything. So that's why we trade. So we've got these textbook chapters, and first one's chapter 3. That's the biggest one. That's the most of it. But then we talk specifically about international trade in chapter 9, but only parts, only sections. So pay close attention to these sections. It's not very much, okay? So all of chapter 3 and bits and pieces of chapter 9, they're accessed here. In the review and extensions, we've got some a really good video by Paul Solman. You don't want to miss the opportunity cost wrap, of course. Specialization and trade, all those, and Economics USA, international trade. Okay, if you're having trouble with the ratios and that kind of thing in this chapter, or in this module, mostly in chapter 3, these might be helpful, where this shows you what comparative advantage, absolute advantage is, the terms of trade. Students have found these to be quite helpful. So these are more lecture format. These are videos. And back to discussions. Okay. They are worth 10% of your grade. So they are worth quite a bit, actually. However, I know in some classes they're worth a lot more. This is where I tell you my philosophy of discussions. Frankly, I think they're kind of abused and overemphasized. I guess an example would be when I first took over the online teaching, gosh, a lot of years ago. When we were just starting out, online was becoming a big thing. I guess I was like, well, that was longer ago than I care to say. We had a vice president of the college at that time who was teaching online. And when I took over those classes, I learned, because I got his students in the next class, all they did was discuss. They really didn't do anything else. And now I know they had a lot of fun, I suppose, but and they were an expert on what everybody's opinion was, but they didn't know very much economics. Okay, I know that's one extreme. Okay, but class discussions, okay, now I tell you my bias. When I was a student, there are two things I hated more than anything in class. One was class discussions. The other was group work. So it's hard for me to have those things in my own classes when I hated those as a student. Now, this was back in the days before online discussions, and I realized the technology really allows for that, but just because technology allows for something doesn't mean it's prudent to do it. I remember a class in particular where the professor, when anybody would say something, raise your hand, get called, he would actually mark it down. He'd lean over, make a note by your name. Oh my gosh, when people saw that, everybody's hand went up. You had to say something, anything. And I'll tell you what, there were some of the most worthless comments because we were forced to talk. You just had to talk. You had to think of something. And man, if the person who he called on before you said what you're going to say, and then he called on you, you had to hurry up and come up with something else. Well, I'm not sure that was a great use of class time. I'm sure got us talking, I guess, but I'm not sure how many comments were worth anything. And as far as group work goes, there's an old saying that a camel is a horse designed by committee. And I know committees are necessary sometimes and groups are, but that's kind of my sums up what I think of that. So yeah, okay, I'm biased. Those are my biases, and discussions aren't worthless. That they're, but I think, well, I think they're worth 10%. That's what I think they're worth. I think they add something to the class. Yes, I do. We just don't want to overdo it. I think they make it more social, more fun. And we'll have a discussion pretty much every other module. And so there's that. Now, as far as my philosophy, I guess, my approach to discussions, I guess there's two ways to look at it. And I've done both. And one is for the professor to just kind of hover over the discussions and actively respond and participate. I have found this kind of intimidates students, and because they feel like I'm looking over the shoulder, ready to pounce with my thoughts or whatever. Now, some students really like that. I found most students don't. So I'm going to just kind of let the discussions. Now I'm reading them, but I'm going to pretty much let them go. Now, once in a while, maybe I'll respond to some themes or whatever that come out in the discussions in the course announcements. But for the most part, I'm leaving this for you. Okay. Just to now you have to be. Now, I've never had a problem with this. Some professors say they have a problem with civility, where students got a little out of hand. I've never had that happen, frankly. But yes, of course, we expect that. But for the most part, well, no. Well, I'm going to let the discussions be your space. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, well, that's pretty much it for Module 2. See you in Module 3.